Greetings, Starfighters. Welcome to the next episode of Shameless Cashgrab. I'm going to keep this brief because tripod issues. You don't need to know, and you probably wouldn't care if you did. The Witch's Mountain, 1972. No idea how this is supposed to tie into vampires. Let's do this.
Alright, I have now watched The Witch's Mountain from 1972. The plot summary for the episode today comes from moviesandmania.com. But before I get into the plot summary, let me just go ahead up front, list all of the things in this movie that have to do with vampires. Now that that's out of the way, let's get on with the episode. After a bitter breakup with his girlfriend Carla, a photojournalist named Mario takes an assignment to an area in the Pyrenees Mountains in northern Spain. On his way, he meets Delia, an attractive freelance writer whom he convinces to join him. The couple stop at an ancient hotel and hear rumors that the nearby mountain is haunted by a coven of dangerous witches, but decide to travel there anyway. So the opening starts mundane, but gets weird real quick when the woman who I initially assumed was our lead character, but in fact is Carla, the ex from the plot summary, sees, and I am not making this up, a wig on the lawn of her home with a knife stuck in it. I'm putting a picture up of it right now. The music for this scene does not set the mood. Carla's face says that this is concerning and odd. Or at least concerning, I don't know how she spends her days. But the music says, hey, time for a 60s driving montage. Not the worst case of soundtrack dissonance I've encountered on this show, to be fair, but still. The rest of this pre-credit sequence has Carla finding seemingly random shit on the floor as she moves through the house, leading to her finding her cat's body covered in the sheets of her bed. Aw, poor kitty. Then things get, well, more weird. There's stuff with writing on a mirror, and a child who acts like an adult, and they run around the property a lot while the little girl complains about the now dead cat, and Carla begging for forgiveness and more time for something. Look, movie, I'm all for setting up a mystery, but you gotta give us something to ground us. If everything doesn't make sense, that's not mystery, that's confusion. Confusion that only increases when suddenly there's a snake that the child is talking to, and Carla sets fire to the garage and boom, credits. What does any of this have to do with anything? Fuck if I know. After the credits, Carla appears in the room of a guy with the most 70s mustache you can imagine. This is where we learn that her name is Carla, by the way. We don't get told that in the opening sequence. The guy in question is Mario from the plot summary, and he is surprised to see Carla there. Surprising no one watching this show, of course, as I already alluded to it in the plot summary. The sequence with the two of them is basically nothing but drama, 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 drama. We follow Mario for the next scene, and, well, rest of the movie, really, as he takes photos on the beach with a rig that makes his camera look kinda like a gun. I'll take products only white people can get away with carrying for $500, Alex. This is where we meet Delia, though we don't get her name for a while. More on that in a little bit. The next 7 or 8 days, minutes, of the movie are just dull. And that's including the scene where Mario hears music that no one else can. Music that, by the way, I can only describe as what a hack comedian sounds like when they make fun of Yoko Ono. Going back to the issue with Delia and how long it takes for the movie to actually tell us that that's her name, I got fed up while watching the movie and just treated to look it up. It really did take that long. However, it is at this point in the viewing process, I realized why that no matter how hard I try, I will just never make it above the M list on movie YouTube. Hell, I'm not even on the Z list, I'm on the ampersand list. The reason for this is because Delia's actress, Patty Shepard, was in 2 other movies in this set. Crypt of the Living Dead, aka Hannah, Queen of the Vampires, and the previous movie, The Werewolf vs. the Vampire Woman. In fact, she was the vampire woman from the friggin' title, and I would not have realized this if I hadn't looked it up. Wow. I'd make a joke here about all these brunette European white ladies looking alike, but let's be honest, I'm just stupid. Well, in my defense, I don't think we ever see her without some kind of head covering throughout The Werewolf vs. the Vampire Woman, and She doesn't even wear so much as a tiny hat in this one. You know what? That's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. And oh joy, lots and lots of driving sequences. Long, long driving sequences. Because Manos, The Hands of Fate is exactly the movie you want to be reminding me of right now. Though I'd certainly take that over when Mario starts yelling at the hard of hearing guy at the inn he and Delia end up at. Yeesh, what a dick. I mean, this does get followed by a better-than-average jump scare, so, the credit where credit is due. Not long after this, in terms of screen time anyway, Delia goes missing while Mario's asleep. Okay, good. I mean, good that something is happening, not that Delia's missing. You know what I mean. Alas, this excitement lasts about as long as it takes for me to say this sentence. Remember how I said at the end of the last episode how I hoped this movie would be more interesting, even if it sucked? Well, boy, was I off. The werewolf versus the vampire woman, in terms of engagement, is the fucking godfather next to this movie. When this section of the movie mercifully ends, the innkeeper warns Mario not to take Delia too close to the mountain. Then we cut straight to the car where Mario tells Delia about what the innkeeper said. There are times in film where repeating things is called for. However, I'm fairly confident that this is not one of them because it hasn't even been 10 seconds. Yeah, at least there's some nice scenery in this part of the movie. I'll give it that much. Also, goats. Apparently Delia doesn't like goats. Well, that's her problem. Goats are cool. And then, Mario's Jeep gets stolen. Amount of fucks given? 0. Oh, it's important to the plot, don't get me wrong. I just don't have enough emotional investment in this movie at this point to care. Besides, they find it less than 10 minutes of screen time later anyway. It gets Mario and Delia where the story needs them to be, and it isn't dragged out like so much of the rest of the movie, so while it would be valid to complain that the scene was too short, I'm going to accept it. Maybe I'm just feeling generous today. Oh hey, we're finally at the halfway point of the movie. Maybe things will pick up here. I mean, it worked for the hearse back in season 1, aka the first slow burn so bad it's good movie I've ever seen. Okay, Witches Mountain, I am giving you a second chance to get interesting here. Don't blow it. So Mario and Delia meet, after catching up to the Jeep in a mostly abandoned village, a seemingly kindly old woman, who claims to be the last one who lives there, with all the other older people dying off and the younger ones moving to the city. This is the best part of the movie so far. No action to speak of, just someone talking, but what they're talking about, while certainly not entirely true given the genre, is relatable, and they got a decent dub actor for the older woman as well. Not great, but better than Mario's to be sure, who seems to be using his outdoor voice even for scenes where he isn't supposed to be yelling. That little quip at Mario aside, the second half actually is off to a decent start. The next sequence, though, I have mixed feelings on. On the one hand, it's a visually interesting bit where Mario goes around taking photos of the village, and you get very brief flashes of people that aren't there in the now of the movie, but have been there in the past. I hope I described that right. It's subtle, and I've seen other movies do similar tricks involving film and the supernatural. However, I don't like the song that's playing over it. It's not a matter of them not being in English. I listen to a lot of music that's not in English. It's just that the sound transfer on the print is not doing it any favors. In fact, it's so bad that it actually took me more than a minute to realize that it wasn't English. Moving on, as night falls, Mario is still walking around outside, apparently having gotten lost in the fog once the sun went down. Delia gets concerned and wants to go out looking for him. This is when I notice that the old woman has this habit of setting up something. A broom, it looks like. I have trouble telling. The film's a little grainy on my copy. But the thing, it's what it does. It's there to basically fall over anytime anyone opens the door. The movie doesn't call too much attention to it, but it's there. I like this bit, but at the same time, it annoys me because I'm like, where was any of this kind of decent filmmaking in the first half of the movie? And at last, the title witches arrive. We see them walking through the darkness, covered partially by both the fog and their clothing. It's a nicely done shot, And when we get back to them after a brief interlude with Delia and the old woman, the shot actually gets even better when we see them carrying torches with green flame, and the music becomes clearer all of a sudden. Definitely not in English, but I dig it regardless of my lack of understanding. Maybe this movie will be This Sets the Hearse after all. We also get a dream sequence with Delia that lasts less than a minute that I'm not sure I can describe without sounding like I'm making it up, so let's just ignore that until it becomes relevant again. Mario eventually makes it back to the old woman's cabin. He describes having seen the witches' procession, although he doesn't call them witches yet, and I only just realized that suddenly Mario's been less of an asshole in this half of the movie. Anyway, the old woman has a noticeable reaction to this and says that they are witches, to which Mario replies by saying, "How can you believe in such stupid things?" Well, I certainly spoke too soon. Mario, in fact, is still a dick. Mario manages to develop the photos with a crude getup he assembled on the hood of his Jeep. I know pretty much nothing about photography, so while I would love to ask an actual photographer how realistic this scene is, I'm not even sure I'd be able to describe it adequately enough for them to tell me if it's accurate or not, and we don't do clips of the movies I talk about on this show. And it's going to stay that way unless I win the lottery or something, because even doing the show the way I've been doing it, just getting out 2 episodes a month, can be a chore sometimes, especially with my oft-mentioned physically demanding day job. My skepticism about how realistic this is, though, is offset somewhat by the film finally recognizing the difference between boring slow and tension-building slow, as Mario quietly goes through the film reel. The tension building comes from Delia waiting for him to say something about it and visibly getting more anxious the longer it takes for him to say something. It works. So anyway, remember the flashes I mentioned before of the women appearing in spaces that were empty when Mario snapped his photos? He sees them now too, after finishing developing. He is understandably curious about how that happened, but he's also concerned when he sees a photo of him and Delia that he has no memory of having taken, and he hasn't been too far from his camera at any point in the movie. So, okay, Witches Mountain. I'm still pissed about the first half being so boring, but now you have my interest. Mario and Delia end up following the old woman after she gets called away by some visitors to help someone who has been injured. I have a few questions about this scene, but they seem kind of nitpicky in my head, so I think I'll let them slide. I'm already a little self-conscious about my show becoming too much like Cinema Sins as is. Let's not pile onto that. They get to the clearing where the injury happened, and a quick flashback shows us it's the same place where the mystery photo was taken. At this point, Mario and Delia decide to head back, while somebody in the distance is yelling at somebody else about not approaching them, the them being Delia and Mario, I'm assuming, until the right time. I don't think I'm conveying that these scenes are, well, not great, still pretty good, at least by this movie's standards. But in my defense, I think these scenes were very badly underserved by having been preceded by so much boredom. Ultimately, Mario decides to continue trying to find out what's going on, so he leaves Delia in the Jeep with the keys, while he goes back to the clearing and he finds blood on a large rock in the middle of it. He eventually makes his way into a cave where he is almost attacked by a guy chained to a wall. The guy from Delia's dream sequence, in fact. I figured that would come up again. This is followed by a jarringly abrupt cut to outdoors, and what tension there might have been is gone now. Damn it, movie, you were actually doing well for the past few scenes. So, Delia gets lured out of the Jeep by singing that seems to come from nowhere, and she slowly walks towards the old woman's cabin. Eventually, we see a hooded figure standing in the doorway of said cabin. Probably the old woman herself, but the audience isn't supposed to know that yet. This scene is pretty effective, I'll give it that, even if getting to it from the last one was so abrupt. Anyway, by the end of the scene, we find Delia taken to a cave, presumably the same one Mario was trying to explore earlier, and lying down. Speaking of Mario, he finds his way back to the cabin using a different path, hence why he didn't see Delia on the way back, and finds it empty. He also finds a voodoo doll and a badly dubbed cat. I say that because the angry cat noises do not match even a little with what the cat is actually seen doing. The cat's body language is definitely more, I can has pets, than I will eat your face. I've had cats before, I know the difference. As Mario continues his search of the cabin, he notices that one of the developed photos has his ex, Carla, in it. Then, in a legitimately well-done camera trick, the cat leaps off the bed and reappears at Mario's back as a red-headed woman. The woman is basically trying to assault Mario, but he fights her off fairly easily, choking her in the process. Presumably to death, though that part gets skipped. He bolts to the Jeep, and Delia is there, so we already know something is amiss. He starts the Jeep, and they take off. This scene isn't bad, but the lack of score here diminishes it a bit. Though, to be fair, a bad score would have diminished it even more, so maybe I shouldn't complain. They get about as far as they can before fog rolls in again, and Mario pulls over. He mentions having a camping tent in the back that he hasn't had the chance to use yet, so he decides to set up there. Delia goes along with it, though how much control she has over her own actions is unclear at this point. Mercifully, the movie doesn't decide to show us every single step of the tent being set up, though for a moment it looked like they might. Given all the padding in the first half, you can understand my concern. The two start kissing, but barely even a minute after it starts, the tent is attacked by the witches of the movie. We can even see their faces this time. They grab Mario and Delia and take them to the clearing from earlier. They tie up Mario and have Delia lie face down on the bloody rock from earlier. There's some ritualistic dancing and singing, and some stuff gets poured on and rubbed into Delia's back. Calm down, people, it's nowhere near as erotic as it sounds. Then they dress Delia up in something that looks like a cross between peasant robes and a wedding gown. Okay. Delia is led off by some of the witches, while the rest, including the hooded one from earlier, who turns out to be Carla, not the old woman like I'd thought, pounce on Mario before we fade to black, and we cut to the inside of the cave. Delia is lying down, and the chained man from earlier is with her. I guess I should mention now that part of that short dream sequence had Delia hanging on to this guy like he was her lover. Delia appears to be free of her mind control at this point, as she strikes the man over the head and runs away. Back outside, we see a bloody Mario, his clothes torn, and it's daylight now. He's alive, but not in great shape, as he struggles a little to get up and follow Delia when he sees her running out of the cave crying. He fails to catch up to her as she proceeds to run right off a cliff and fall to her death. It's off-screen, and there's a scream, so it's 50-50 as to if she was killing herself or just didn't look where she was going and tripped. But I'm kind of leaning towards the former, and so is probably everyone who saw The Last of the Mohicans. Mario returns to his Jeep, which he takes back to the village, and proceeds to burn it down. Mario drives home, walks into his front door, and all the witches are there, quietly waiting for him, along with some chains and some other stuff. I guess that means that Mario's going to be the new guy chained in the cave. But, okay, movie, is he replacing the guy that Delia hit? Did he die from the head injury? It didn't look like she hit him that hard, but head wounds can be tricky. Did the witches just decide they were done with that guy? Or is this going to be both of them in the cave now? And how do the witches plan to carry off Mario anyway? He lives in a city. Somebody's bound to notice a small platoon of women in black robes, even at night. And also, how the hell did they get down there anyway, let alone ahead of him, when there didn't seem to be any vehicles anywhere near that village? But yeah, that's the end. Random thoughts I had while watching the movie. Yeah, I was too bored to really have that many random thoughts about the movie, especially in the first half. I did think of some ideas for future Rants vs. Zombies episodes, though. I haven't done much with that show lately. The Delia goes sleepwalking without realizing it sequence needed some music or something. Might have broken up the monotony. Now, you may be wondering if I was exaggerating a little at the opening about the complete lack of a vampire connection here. Well, not really, no. I mean, the lack of resistance when Mario is burninating the village suggests that, like vampires, the witches can only come out at night. Except several times during the movie we see them out in the daylight. Carla's whole first scene takes part during the day. So, really, there doesn't seem to be a vampire connection with this movie at all. Okay, stepping back a bit, maybe the witches were headed to Mario's place while he was passed out, but at least one of them wanted to stick around to make sure that he didn't bleed out if they were planning to. The point is, there's really not a vampire connection with this movie. At all. Like I said. Even less than with Primeval when you think about it, because at least Primeval had Satan in it, and a lot of vampire myths involve Satan, though not all, don't at me. Final verdict. In addition to sharing an actress with the werewolf versus the vampire woman, this movie suffers from the same problem. It has some good scenes, to be fair, most of which I called out in this episode, But rather than elevating this movie, they only make the bad parts stand out more. All the unanswered questions, like who the little girl in the opening was, or what the deal with Delia's dream sequence was, what exactly the ending meant, among others. I guess the filmmakers took the Joe Quesada approach to the title witch's abilities, i.e., it's magic, we don't have to explain it.